The train ticket fell from Paul's jacket pocket like a death sentence. I stood frozen in our bedroom, staring at the innocuous slip of paper that threatened to unravel my entire world. Chicago, next Friday, the day of Ellen's high school graduation. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Paul he couldn't. Susan, you home? His voice echoed from downstairs, startling me out of my daze. I quickly shoved the ticket into my pocket. Up here, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. Paul appeared in the doorway, his smile faltering as he took in my expression. Everything okay? I forced a smile. Just tired. How was work? He shrugged, loosening his tie. Same old, meetings, deadlines, you know how it is. I nodded, my throat tight. Ellen called earlier. She's staying at Jess's to work on their science project. Again? Paul frowned. She's been spending a lot of time there lately. She's 15, Paul. It's normal. He grunted, heading for the shower. As the water started running, I pulled out the ticket again, studying it. Round trip, first class. My stomach churned. I needed answers. Grabbing Paul's phone from the nightstand, I hesitated for a moment before entering his passcode. 1985. The year we met. At least that hadn't changed. My fingers shook as I scrolled through his messages. Work emails, group chats with friends, and then my heart stopped. A conversation with someone named M. No last name, just an initial. Can't wait to see you in Chicago, handsome. It's been too long. Missing you already. These secret meetings aren't enough anymore. I love you. When are you going to leave her? The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. Paul's voice called out from the bathroom. Everything all right out there? I swallowed hard. Just dropped something. Don't worry about it. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of loving Ellen as my own. All of it. A lie? The shower shut off, and I heard Paul moving around in the bathroom. I had to pull myself together. Taking a deep breath, I picked up his phone and placed it back on the nightstand. Paul emerged, a towel wrapped around his waist. Hey, I was thinking we could go out for dinner tonight. That new Italian place downtown? I nodded mechanically. Sounds nice. He frowned, stepping closer. Are you sure you're okay? You seem off. For a moment, I considered confronting him right then and there, demanding answers, screaming, throwing things. But Ellen's face flashed in my mind. Her graduation was in a week. I couldn't ruin that for her. I'm fine, I lied, plastering on a smile. Just worried about Ellen. She seems so distant lately. Paul's expression softened. She's a teenager, Sue. It's normal. Remember how you were telling me earlier? I bit back a bitter laugh. Of course I remembered. I remembered everything about our life together. Every moment, every promise. Did any of it matter to him? You're right, I said, standing up. I'll go start the car. Meet you downstairs in 10. He nodded, already turning away to get dressed. As I left the room, my mind was racing. I needed a plan. I needed proof. Most of all, I needed to protect Ellen. In the car, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd use. Hello, is this Hawkins Investigations? I need your help. As Paul climbed into the passenger seat, I ended the call. He smiled at me, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Ready to go, honey? I nodded, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Ready as I'll ever be. I never imagined I'd be a mother at 35, let alone to a child who wasn't biologically mine. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? The day I met Ellen, she was all gangly limbs and wary eyes, hiding behind Paul's legs. I knelt down, my heart pounding. Hi, Ellen. I'm Susan. It's nice to meet you. She peered at me, her small face scrunched in concentration. Do you like unicorns? I laughed, relief washing over me. I love unicorns. Do you want to show me yours? As Ellen dragged me to her room, chattering about her stuffed animal collection, I caught Paul's eye. He smiled, mouthing, thank you. But it wasn't always that easy. The first time Ellen called me Mom, I froze, panic rising in my chest. Later that night, I confessed my fears to Paul. What if I'm not good enough? I whispered, tears threatening to spill. What if I mess her up? Paul pulled me close, his voice steady. You're already an amazing mother, Sue. Ellen adores you. But what if? He cut me off with a kiss. No what ifs. We're in this together, remember? I nodded, clinging to his words like a lifeline. Together, always. Now, as I sat in the parking lot of Hawkins Investigations, that memory felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Together. What a joke. The door opened, and a gruff-looking man approached my car. Mrs. Thompson? I nodded, stepping out. Mr. Hawkins? He grunted in affirmation. Got your message. Infidelity case, right? I flinched at the bluntness. Yes, I need proof. Always do in these cases. Come on in, we'll talk details. Inside his cluttered office, I perched on the edge of a worn leather chair, feeling like I was in a bad noir film. Hawkins settled behind his desk, pulling out a notepad. Tell me everything you know. I took a deep breath, recounting the train ticket, the text messages, Paul's recent late nights at the office. With each word, the reality of my situation sank in deeper. Hawkins nodded, scribbling notes. Classic signs. Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson, we'll get you the evidence you need. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. A text from Ellen. Mom, can we talk when you get home? It's important. My heart raced. Did she know? Had she noticed something off with Paul, too? I rushed home, finding Ellen pacing in the living room. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed. Honey, what's wrong? She hesitated, then blurted out, I think Dad's cheating on you. The world tilted on its axis. I stumbled to the couch, sinking down. What makes you say that? Ellen sat beside me, her voice trembling. I overheard him on the phone last night. He was talking about meeting someone in Chicago, and he said he loved her. I pulled her close, my mind reeling. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. You knew? I nodded, my throat tight. I just found out yesterday. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. Ellen's face crumpled, and she buried her head in my shoulder, sobbing. I held her, my own tears falling silently. After a while, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. What are we going to do? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. What were we going to do? How could we salvage our family from this betrayal? Before I could answer, the front door opened. Paul's voice called out, I'm home. Where is everyone? Ellen and I locked eyes, panic mirrored in our expressions. In that moment, I made a decision. No more secrets, no more lies. We're in here, I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. As Paul's footsteps approached, I squeezed Ellen's hand. Whatever happened next, we'd face it together. Mother and daughter, united against the storm. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Paul entered. His easy smile faltered when he saw our faces. What's going on? He asked, his eyes darting between Ellen and me. I took a deep breath. Paul, we need to talk about Chicago. The color drained from his face. What about Chicago? Ellen stood up, her voice trembling but determined. We know, Dad. We know about her. Paul's facade crumbled. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. I can explain. Save it. I snapped, years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. How long, Paul? How long have you been lying to us? He looked up, his eyes pleading. It's not what you think. Marion is just... Marion, Ellen interrupted, her voice cracking. You're on a first-name basis with your mistress? Paul flinched as if he'd been slapped. Ellen, honey, please. Don't honey me, she spat. I trusted you. We both did. I placed a hand on Ellen's shoulder, steadying her. We want the truth, Paul. All of it. What followed was a painful confession. Marion was a colleague, a friendship that had turned into something more. It had been going on for months. Each word was like a dagger to my heart. I never meant for this to happen, Paul finished lamely. I laughed bitterly. But it did happen, Paul, and on Ellen's graduation day of all times. Ellen's head snapped up. What? I hesitated, realizing my mistake too late. The Chicago trip? It's scheduled for your graduation day. The look of betrayal on Ellen's face was devastating. She turned to Paul, her voice barely above a whisper. You were going to miss my graduation for her? Paul reached out, but Ellen recoiled. I'm sorry, Save it, she said, echoing my earlier words. I'm going to Jess's. Before either of us could stop her, Ellen stormed out, the front door slamming behind her. I rounded on Paul. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? He slumped further into his chair. Of course not. I love you both. I got lost. Lost? I scoffed. You're a grown man, Paul, not a toddler in a supermarket. You made choices that hurt your family. Paul nodded, defeated. What happens now? I stood up, suddenly feeling every one of my years. Now I'm going to find our daughter, and when I get back, I expect you to be gone. Gone? Paul's head shot up. You're kicking me out? Consider it a trial separation, I said, my voice cold. I need time to think, and Ellen needs space. You owe us that much. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, Paul called out, Susan, wait. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Without turning, I said, "Sometimes, Paul, sorry isn't enough." The drive to Jess's house was a blur. My mind raced with everything that had happened. How had we gotten here? When did our happy family start to crumble? I pulled up to the curb, spotting Ellen sitting on the front steps. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red and puffy. "Hey," I said softly, sitting beside her. "Hey," she mumbled back. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down on us. Finally, Ellen spoke. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out together." She leaned into me, her voice small. "I hate him." "No, you don't," I said gently. "You're hurt and angry, and that's okay. But hate will only hurt you in the long run." Ellen nodded, sniffling. "I just want things to go back to normal." I kissed the top of her head, my heart breaking for her. "I know, baby. Me too." As we sat there, the sun setting behind us, I realized that normal was a thing of the past. Our lives had been irrevocably changed, but looking at Ellen, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, we'd face it as a team. "Come on," I said, standing up. "Let's go home." Ellen hesitated. Is he still there?" I shook my head. "No, it's just us now." She took my hand, squeezing it tight. "Okay, let's go home." As we walked to the car, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, fear, but underneath it all, a small spark of hope. We'd weathered this storm. Whatever came next, we'd weather that too, together. The days following Paul's departure blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and tense conversations. Ellen retreated further into herself, barely leaving her room except for school. I threw myself into work, desperate for any distraction from the gaping hole in our lives. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I finally dragged myself home early, determined to connect with Ellen. The house was quiet as I entered, but I heard muffled voices coming from upstairs. My heart leapt. Was Ellen finally talking to a friend? As I climbed the stairs, the voices grew clearer. One was definitely Ellen's, but the other... My blood ran cold. "Paul." I burst into Ellen's room without knocking. They both jumped, guilty expressions on their faces. Paul was perched on the edge of Ellen's bed, while she sat cross-legged, clutching a pillow to her chest. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Paul stood up, hands raised placatingly. "Susan, please. I was just talking to Ellen about..." "About what?" I interrupted. "About how you betrayed our family? About how you were planning to abandon your daughter on her graduation day?" Ellen flinched at my words, and I immediately regretted my harshness. But the sight of Paul in our home, acting like nothing had changed, ignited a fury I couldn't contain. "Mom," Ellen said softly, "Dad was just..." "No," I cut her off. "Whatever he was just doing, it stops now. Paul, get out." He hesitated, looking between Ellen and me. "Susan, we need to talk about this, as a family." I laughed bitterly. "Family? You gave up that right when you decided to start a new one with Marion." Paul's face paled. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how I know," I snapped. "What matters is that you're here, in our home, trying to manipulate our daughter." "I'm not manipulating anyone," Paul protested. "Ellen called me. She wanted to talk." I turned to Ellen, hurt and betrayal washing over me. "Is that true?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. I wanted to understand why." My anger deflated, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." Paul took a step towards me. "Susan, please, let's sit down and talk about this rationally." Something in me snapped. "Rationally? You want to talk rationally about how you destroyed our family? About how you lied and cheated and..." I stopped abruptly as a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room spun, and I grabbed the doorframe for support. "Mom?" Ellen's voice sounded far away. "Are you okay?" I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing I saw was Paul and Ellen's panicked faces as the world went black. I woke up in a hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors filling the room. Ellen was curled up in a chair beside me, her face tear-stained even in sleep. Paul was nowhere to be seen. A nurse entered, smiling when she saw I was awake. "Welcome back, Mrs. Thompson. How are you feeling?" "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry. "You fainted," she explained gently. "Your blood pressure was dangerously high. The doctor wants to run some tests, but it seems the stress of your situation may have contributed." I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. I'd let Paul's betrayal consume me so completely that I'd neglected my own health, and worse, I'd scared Ellen. As if on cue, Ellen stirred, her eyes widening when she saw me awake. Mom, you're okay. She threw herself into my arms, and I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm okay now. Ellen pulled back, wiping her eyes. Dad's in the waiting room. He's been here all night. I tensed, torn between gratitude for his concern and anger at his presence. But looking at Ellen's hopeful face, I realized I had a choice to make. I could let my bitterness towards Paul poison our family further, or I could find a way to move forward, for Ellen's sake and for my own. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed Ellen's hand. Can you ask him to come in? I think it's time we all talked. As Ellen nodded and hurried out, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Things couldn't go on as they had been. It was time for a change, and I was ready to face it head on. The hospital room felt suffocating as Paul entered, his face a mask of concern and guilt. Ellen squeezed my hand before slipping out, leaving us alone. Susan, Paul began, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I held up a hand, silencing him. Save it, Paul. I didn't ask you here for apologies. He nodded, sinking into the chair Ellen had vacated. Then why? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I need to know everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I deserve that much. Paul's shoulders slumped. You're right. You do. What followed was a painful confession that shook me to my core. Marion wasn't just a fling. They'd been seeing each other for over a year. They'd met at a conference in Chicago and had been carrying on their affair ever since. We never meant to fall in love, Paul said, his eyes pleading for understanding. The word love hit me like a physical blow. Love? I spat. You destroy our family and call it love? Paul flinched. I know it's not fair. I know I've hurt you both terribly, but I can't change how I feel. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. And Ellen's graduation? You were really going to miss that for her? He had the decency to look ashamed. I wasn't thinking straight. Marion had surprised me with tickets to a show in Chicago. I didn't realize the dates conflicted until later. And you chose her, I said flatly. Paul nodded, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his betrayal hanging heavy between us. Finally, I spoke. I want a divorce. He nodded again, unsurprised. I understand. I'll give you whatever you want. The house, full custody of Ellen. Ellen isn't a bargaining chip, I snapped. She's our daughter. Or have you forgotten that in your new life with Marion? Paul's face crumpled. Of course not. I love Ellen more than anything. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, Paul, I said, my voice softening despite myself. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Ellen peeked in, her face anxious. Is everything okay? I forced a smile. Come in, sweetheart. We were just talking. Ellen entered hesitantly, looking between us. About what? Paul and I exchanged a glance. It was time for the hardest conversation of all. Honey, I began gently, your father and I have decided to get a divorce. Ellen's face fell, but she didn't look surprised. Because of Marion? Paul started. You know about Marion? She nodded, her voice small. I overheard you on the phone once. I didn't want to believe it, but my heart broke for her. Oh, Ellen, I'm so sorry you've been carrying this alone. She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the tears in her eyes. It's okay. I kind of figured this was coming. Paul reached out to her, but she stepped back. Ellen, please. I know I've messed up, but I still love you. That will never change. Ellen's face hardened. If you loved us, you wouldn't have done this. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I realized then that it wasn't just my marriage that was broken. Paul's relationship with Ellen might be irreparably damaged too. As I watched them, father and daughter, unable to bridge the chasm between them, I knew I had to make a decision, not just for myself, but for Ellen. We couldn't go on like this, trapped in a limbo of hurt and resentment. Paul, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I think it's best if you move out, permanently. He nodded, resigned. I understand. I'll start looking for a place tomorrow. Ellen's shoulders relaxed slightly, and I knew I'd made the right choice. As Paul left the room, promising to visit again soon, I pulled Ellen close. We're going to be okay, I whispered, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. It's just you and me now, kid. We'll figure this out together. As Ellen clung to me, I silently vowed to do whatever it took to protect her and rebuild our lives. The road ahead would be difficult, but we'd face it as a team. Mother and daughter, against the world. The days after my hospital stay passed in a blur of legal meetings and hushed conversations. Paul moved out quietly, leaving behind a house full of memories and a daughter who refused to speak to him. I threw myself into work and caring for Ellen, desperate to maintain some semblance of normalcy. It was a rainy Tuesday when everything came to a head. I was in my home office, poring over divorce papers, when I heard the front door slam. Ellen's footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut. Alarmed, I rushed to check on her. "Ellen, honey, what's wrong?" No response. I knocked gently. "Ellen, please, talk to me." The door flew open, revealing Ellen's tear-stained face. I saw them, as she choked out. My heart sank. Saw who? Dad and her, Marion. Ellen spat the name like a curse. They were at the mall, holding hands, laughing like nothing was wrong. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry." Ellen's face crumpled. "How could he do this to us, Mom? How could he just replace us?" I pulled her into a tight hug, my own tears threatening to fall. "I don't know, baby. I wish I had answers for you." We stood there for a long moment, by clinging to each other. Finally, Ellen pulled away, wiping her eyes. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her voice made me pause. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I've known about Dad's affair for a while, longer than I let on." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "What? How long?" "A few months," Ellen admitted eyes. "I found some texts on his phone. I didn't know how to tell you. My mind reeled. All those times Ellen had been distant, locked away in her room. She'd been carrying this burden alone. "Oh, Ellen," I breathed. "Why didn't you say something?" She shrugged, looking small and vulnerable. "I thought, if I ignored it, maybe it would go away. Maybe Dad would realize what he was risking and stop." My heart broke for her. "Sweetheart, this isn't your fault. None of this is your responsibility." Ellen's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "But it is. I'm the reason you stayed with him for so long. If I hadn't been here, you could have left years ago." I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Listen to me, Ellen. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You're not the reason I stayed. You're the reason I found the strength to leave." She blinked, surprised. "Really?" I nodded, cupping her face in my hands. "Really, you and me, we're a team. No matter what happens with your dad, that will never change." Ellen's lip trembled. "Promise?" "I promise," I said firmly. "Now, how about we order some pizza and have a movie night? Just the two of us?" For the first time in weeks, Ellen smiled. "Can we get extra cheese?" I laughed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Extra cheese it is!" As we settled onto the couch, surrounded by comfort food and cheesy rom-coms, I felt a surge of determination. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Just as the movie was reaching its climax, my phone buzzed. A text from Paul. "We need to talk. It's important." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. What now? Haven't we been through enough? Ellen noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, then showed her the text. Her face hardened. "Are you going to meet him?" I took a deep breath, weighing my options. On one hand, I was done with Paul's drama. On the other, if it was truly important. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Ellen, realizing in that moment that her opinion mattered more than anyone else's. She thought for a moment, then squared her shoulders. "I think we should hear him out, together." I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. "Okay, together it is." As I typed out a response to Paul, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something big. Whatever news he had, whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain. Ellen and I would face it as a united front. The real test of our strength was about to begin. The coffee shop buzzed with quiet conversation, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for Paul to arrive. Ellen sat beside me, her hand clasped tightly in mine. "We can still leave," I whispered, giving her one last chance to back out. She shook her head, jaw set. "No, we need to hear what he has to say." The bell above the door chimed, and Paul walked in. My breath caught in my throat. He looked different. Tired, yes, but there was something else. A nervousness I'd never seen in him before. He spotted us and made his way over, hesitating before sitting down. "Thank you for meeting me, both of you." Ellen remained silent, her grip on my hand tightening. "What's this about, Paul?" I asked, cutting to the chase. He took a deep breath. "Marian's pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. Ellen gasped beside me, her free hand flying to her mouth. How far along?" I managed to choke out. 3 months, Paul said, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I only found out last week. I wanted to tell you both in person." Ellen's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're going to have another baby?" Paul nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I know this changes everything. I'm so sorry." I felt numb, my mind racing. A baby. Paul and Marian were having a baby. Ellen would have a half-sibling. The family I thought we had was shattering even further. "What does this mean for us?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "For the divorce?" Paul ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. Marian wants me to move in with her, to be there for the baby." Ellen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't do this," she choked out before running towards the restroom. I started to follow, but Paul caught my arm. "Susan, wait, there's more." I turned back, anger flaring. What more could there possibly be? He swallowed hard. "Marian's job is transferring her to New York. She wants me to go with her." The world tilted on its axis. "New York? You're moving across the country?" Paul nodded, looking miserable. "I haven't decided yet. I don't want to leave Ellen, but you have a new family now," I finished bitterly. He flinched. "It's not like that. I love Ellen. I love you both. I don't know what to do." I laughed humorlessly. "That seems to be a recurring theme with you, Paul." Before he could respond, Ellen returned, her eyes red-rimmed but her face set in determination. "I heard everything," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, "and I've made a decision." We both turned to her, surprised. "I want to live with Mom full-time," Ellen continued. "No shared custody, no visitation. I don't want to see you anymore, Dad." Paul's face crumpled. "Ellen, please, I know I've messed up, but—" "No," Ellen cut him off. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. My little girl so strong in the face of such pain. Paul looked at me, desperation in his eyes. "Susan, please, talk to her." I shook my head. "This is Ellen's decision. I support her completely." He slumped in his chair, defeated. "What happens now?" I stood up, pulling Ellen close. "Now, we finish the divorce. You go to New York with Marian and your new baby. And Ellen and we move on." As we walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Paul behind, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, but also relief. The uncertainty was over. We had a clear path forward. Ellen squeezed my hand. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" I looked down at her, this brave, resilient girl who had become the center of my world. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay." As we stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we'd face it together. Mother and daughter against the world. The real journey was just beginning. The morning of Ellen's graduation dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the past few months. As I helped Ellen into her gown, I couldn't help but marvel at the young woman she'd become. "You ready for this?" I asked, smoothing down her collar. She nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be." We'd moved into our new apartment just a week ago, boxes still scattered around. It was smaller than our old house, but it felt like home. Our home. As we drove to the school, Ellen fidgeted with her cap. Do you think Dad will show up?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I don't know, honey, but whatever happens, I'm here." The auditorium was packed when we arrived. I spotted Paul almost immediately, standing awkwardly near the back. Our eyes met, and he gave a hesitant wave. Ellen tensed beside me. "You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to," I whispered. She squared her shoulders. "No, I think I need to." I watched as Ellen approached Paul. They spoke briefly, Paul's face a mix of regret and pride. When Ellen returned, her eyes were dry but determined. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah, I told him I'm glad he came, but that doesn't change anything." Pride swelled in my chest, my brave, resilient girl. As the ceremony began, I found myself reflecting on our journey. The pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty. It had all led us here, to this moment of triumph and new beginnings. When Ellen's name was called, I cheered louder than anyone. Our eyes met as she crossed the stage, and in that moment, I knew we'd be okay. After the ceremony, we were swept up in a whirlwind of photos and congratulations. Paul approached cautiously, Marian hovering in the background. "Congratulations, Ellen," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Ellen's smile was polite but distant. "Thanks, Dad." An awkward silence fell. Finally, Paul cleared his throat. "We're, heading to New York next week. I was hoping maybe we could have dinner before we go?" Ellen glanced at me, then back at her father. "I don't think that's a good idea. Maybe someday, but not now." Paul nodded, disappointment and understanding warring on his face. "I understand. Take care of each other, okay?" As he walked away, I pulled Ellen close. "You okay?" She took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I am." That night, as we celebrated with takeout and ice cream in our new apartment, Ellen turned to me with a serious expression. "Mom, I want you to know something," she said. "I don't regret choosing you. Not for a second." Tears pricked my eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't regret choosing you either." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Good, because you're stuck with me now." We laughed, the sound filling our small living room. It wasn't perfect. There were still boxes to unpack, wounds to heal, a future to figure out. But we were together, and that was what mattered. As I tucked Ellen into bed that night, a ritual she claimed she was too old for but secretly loved, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "Mom?" Ellen's voice was sleepy. "Do you think we'll be okay?" I smoothed her hair back, remembering all we'd been through. The betrayal, the heartache, the difficult choices, but also the love, the resilience, the unbreakable bond between us. "Yeah, baby," I said softly. "We're going to be more than okay." As I closed her door, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had discovered Paul's betrayal all those months ago. Stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever came next. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. Our story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. Ellen and I would face them together. Mother and daughter against the world. And that was all we needed.